You're listening to Speaking Side Mount, the podcast where we talk all things side mount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and side mount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top side mount divers. Whether you're new to side mount, been side mount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things side mount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Side Mount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is sponsored by xDeep and by the patrons of Speaking Side Mount. Thanks so much to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. I've been so looking forward to producing this episode. As you'll all know, I spent a year or more researching both privately and through my interviews with guests on this show before I decided that the KISS Sidewinder was the right rebreather for me. As a side mount diver and instructor, my reasoning and criteria were pretty straightforward. The rebreather needed to work with my existing side mount setup with as little change as possible, and I needed to be able to achieve the same balance, trim and stability as I could in open circuit. Obviously, worker breathing in different orientations was also important, and so the KISS Sidewinder was the clear winner and pretty much the only rebreather that could fulfill my criteria. Designed by Mike Young for a disabled veteran and launched to little fanfare in the 2016-17 period, I think it's fair to say that many in the dive industry didn't take the Sidewinder seriously at first. Ed Sorensen himself thought it would not be a unit that he would dive a lot. That was until he put it in the water. Ed performed much of the test diving of the Sidewinder and was behind many of the improvements that resulted in the first model. He racked up literally thousands of hours on the unit, and it became his preferred and pretty much only method of diving. Many of you will be aware that Ed is one of the world's foremost cave rescue and sadly recovery divers. Staggeringly, he has been responsible for a bunch of rescues, including that of Josh Bratchley in a cave in Tennessee in 2019. Now you may recall Josh was a support diver with the cave diving group during the Thai cave rescue only months earlier. And then even more staggeringly, this rescue was only a few months after Ed and Mike Young recovered the bodies of two divers trapped in a cave in the Dominican Republic. Now, it was during this recovery that Philip Lehman from the Dominican Republic Speleological Society first saw Ed using the Sidewinder, and he immediately saw the possibilities for the cave exploration projects that he and Patrick Widmann were working on. He convinced Patrick to train with Ed and to cross over to the Sidewinder, and this set the wheels in motion for a staggering period of growth for this unit. There is no doubt that once ProTech Mexico picked up this unit and started demonstrating its use on exploration projects, the cave diving world stood up and took notice. Now it's the tool of choice for many, and it's without doubt the top-selling side mount rebreather in the world. With the acquisition of KISS Rebreathers and grouping it with xDeep and sealed dry suits, we are now in a situation where the best is about to get better. The new KISS team have spent the past 2 years reworking the Sidewinder to improve it and also to achieve CE certification, which is essential for the unit to be sold in Europe. The Sidewinder 2, as we're currently calling it, is a revelation. The innovations, many of them patent pending, are sure to lead to a rebreather that sets a new bar for all to follow, and I'm personally super excited to see what comes later this year. Patrick Widmann has become the training director for KISS and is also heavily involved in every aspect of the redesign and testing of the Sidewinder 2. Now in this episode, Patrick and I discuss the history of the Sidewinder, Patrick's own journey with this unit, the acquisition of KISS Rebreathers, and then we move around the closed loop for the Sidewinder 2 and discuss each of the changes and what this will mean for the new unit. We finish with Patrick sharing on the new instructor and training tools that appear to be as innovative as the unit itself, and we also discuss the pros and cons of a BOV or Bailout Valve for the Sidewinder. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Side Mount. Hey Patrick, welcome to Speaking Side Mount.
Hey Steve, thanks for having me.
Hey mate, great to catch up, and I'm still buzzing from our time late last year. How have you been?
It has been rather busy. Not necessarily in a positive way. I don't get to do a lot of diving. I have to spend a lot of time in front of a computer, but other than that, very good.
Yeah, man, you're one of the busiest people I know. It's unbelievable the amount of hours you put in. Certainly from the Sidewinder community, I appreciate that because a lot of that's going into the subject of today's interview, which is the KISS Sidewinder 2. And I think just to get us started, we should perhaps give this a bit of context. I went pretty deep into the Sidewinder over a series of interviews where I was researching a rebreather for myself. And in particular, episode 40 with Ed Sorensen, we went through the Sidewinder in great detail and also talked a bit about my Mod 1 training with Ed. And then, of course, episode 82 recently with Jake Ballman, we went into my Mod 2 training with you, Patrick, because you were clearly too busy to talk to me then. And that was pretty cool to be able to do that. And I mean, look, for sure, since like 17, 18, it seems as if the Sidewinder has developed this kind of rabid following in the cave diving community in particular. But it wasn't always that way. And Patrick, from your point of view, can you share a bit about the history of the Sidewinder?
I think it's not a secret. It's rather well known that when I was introduced to the Sidewinder at the beginning, I had a really, really negative opinion of it. Just from a background of heavy metal, big, sturdy, redundant, highly electronical rebreathers. So when I saw the Sidewinder the first couple of times, which was in Mexico, cave diving, and then in Australia also, I had a really, really poor opinion of it. It looked like a plastic, coming out of some winding machine towards the type of equipment. And it was through a very long series of coincidences that led my exploration partner, Philip, to end up with the Sidewinder and then dive with me. And we spent some time together trying to find a configuration to suit our exploration needs. And when then I saw it the first time in this context, I couldn't escape the temptation and ask him, hey, can I do a spin on it? And I think something that every rebreather diver can relate to when you're in very shallow water, well, not even very shallow water, let's say anywhere from 15 feet down to about 80 feet. You're just constantly waiting for something to happen, right? You're either going to go up or you're going to go down or you're going to fall left or you're going to fall right. There's something is about to happen. And there's quite a lot of fin movement going on and body movement going on in order to stabilize. So in many aspects, sometimes the rebreather kind of like took the fun out of diving for me. It became a pure tool to do rather long range or very deep diving. So when I was the first time with the Sidewinder underwater, the first thing I realized was that just nothing is happening. So one of the main reasons for that is if you dive minimum loop volume and you inhale and you have that one breath inside of you, there's still gas in the rebreather, right? You didn't create a vacuum inside the rebreather. Mm-hmm. And obviously, the larger this volume is, the harder it is to dive that rebreather in shallow water because let's say it will be 10 liters, that static volume. In a moment, you go up a couple of, half a meter, 3 feet or whatever, all of this gas is expanding and then you have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And many other rebreathers, depending on where the counterlungs are, between inhalation and exhalation, you also experience a trim change, right? You either move the gas from your lungs to your shoulders or you're going to move the gas from your lungs to the side or some other places. So there's constant things that move that you need to counterbalance. And so from the first moment with the Sidewinder, I realized I'm just static underwater. I can hang out in 10 feet, 3 meters, and just nothing happens. I can exhale and stay exhaled. I can inhale and hold my breath. I'm just not moving. So suddenly, all of the fun of diving came back with the rebreather. So I was completely and utterly mesmerized and fascinated by it. And first I thought, well, maybe the reason why my first impression of the Sidewinder is so good is because of the 15, 16, 17 years of rebreather experience that I have and the thousands of hours that I did. And so that's why my first impression is just a better impression. But then I realized when the boom started and I started to do like more tryout dives with people, somebody that had never used a rebreather in their life would hover in 3 meters, 10 feet, like they had, hundreds of hours. Something that before when I did sea training mostly, people would come in with lots of experience and they struggled immensely to stay in very shallow water. So then suddenly I realized that there's something going on. Well, and then it was like, like an explosion, a domino effect. I don't know how you want to call it, but before we knew what was going on, I think in the first year when I was actively teaching and using it, we sold about 50 Sidewinders in Mexico, which was like, is unheard of, people selling rebreathers in Mexico. Like before that in ProTech, we sold maybe, 10 rebreathers in 10 years. And then suddenly we did like 50 in 1 year. And I think by now we passed close to 90 rebreathers now in our area. And besides that, suddenly I had to travel to Asia and like travel all around the planet just to give this class. And it became a complete bushfire. The funny part is I'm right here in the Go Dive Show in England. And there was, 4 presentations or 5 presentations about cave exploration and cave diving around the world. And literally the only rebreather in all the videos was a Sidewinder, which is really quite funny.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it is amazing. I mean, I remember my own experience when I did all the research and chatted to everyone from Michael Thomas to Christina Zanato. Gee, who else did I talk to? A lot of people before I got to Ed. And then talking to Ed and then deciding to do the training. And I think it was just before you had your experience. I was there in kind of September of 2018. And I wanted something that would bolt on top of my side mount setup that would give me the same feeling I have in open circuit side mount. which is just as you described, super balanced, super trimmed out, able to control myself. And as soon as I put the Sidewinder on, I've got the actual footage on a video that I took, that edge shot of me on my very first push your head underwater and swim towards the entrance of Jackson Blue there. And I'm in trim. Am I perfect at that point? No, but was I able to swim a rebreather into the entrance of Jackson Blue and look like I did before an open circuit? Yeah, I was. And then, of course, all the training, all the round and rounds I did in Jackson Blue and near the entrance there, you just get better and better. And as you understand how the rebreather works, it feels as if it's not fighting you, which I think is the experience you were talking about before, where you feel as if your equipment is fighting against what you're looking to be as a good diver, which is trimmed out, balanced, stable. And the Sidewinder seems to support that, or does support that. And this is why I think we're getting this experience. And also I think, when you think about cave diving and the skill set required, contrasting it with open water diving, let's say, the requirement to be in trim and balanced and stable, it just lends itself to exactly what we're doing in cave diving. And of course, as you said, in cave exploration now.
And I think what really drives it home, though, is not that it's super lightweight, easy to travel with, and all. For sure, there's all advantages. But the biggest thing that I cannot stop to highlight is the fun factor. How much fun it is to dive the Sidewinder. Because most training agencies will tell you, if you're a CCR cave instructor, when you teach open circuit cave diving, after day 2, day 3, day 4, you should be on your rebreather, right? So that the student can see, what he can aspire to do or the type of diving that he can grow into. In 15 years doing this, I never used my rebreather on an open circuit cave class because there's no way, right? It would be just too stressful and too unnecessarily complicated. In the same time, how many fun dives did I do that did not require a rebreather? Not a lot. But for me, literally, the rebreather was a pure tool for either long penetrations or deep diving. But it was not something that I was like, oh, tomorrow I have a day off. Why don't I go to a 40-foot, 12-meter deep cave and swim around with my Megalodon? I would have really not done that. But suddenly with the Sidewinder, since I started with the Sidewinder, that was, I don't remember now, 2018. I would have to look at the card. But I did exactly 2 open circuit dives in the past, whatever that was, 4 or 5 years. And I do approximately about 500 hours on the rebreather per year.
Yeah, man, I'm with you 100%. Like, I'm teaching some open circuit side mount courses at the moment. And to be honest, I think, I haven't dived open circuit for 4 or 5 months, because every dive I'm doing, whether it needs it or not, is on the Sidewinder because, as you said, it's fun. And is it necessarily a tool that I 100% need for those dives? Could I do them open circuit? Sure, I could. But it's almost like the ability to blend nitrox on the fly in a rebreather is an advantage on a lot of the dives I do anyhow. Many of them are in the 30-meter range. So it's a cool tool to use for that anyhow. And I just like diving it. It's my tool of preference now, even for relatively shallow dives. I remember even in Mexico, we did dives at Nahoch where the average depth was about 6 meters. And so is that a dive that you need a rebreather for necessarily? No, but it was just my preferred way of diving now.
This is exactly what you explained. So before, a rebreather was more like a necessary tool. But now it doesn't matter if it's necessary or not. For me personally, it's just more fun. Whatever type of diving I do, it's just more fun to be in a Sidewinder because the way that you blend into the environment, the less noise. For me, honestly, I sometimes feel I have a better buoyancy on a Sidewinder than I have an open circuit. And there's no way that before that I would have traveled to Korea or Japan or Israel or Poland or traveled to any of these places to teach like an open circuit Sidewinder class or any other class for that matter. It would have been, but just being with the Sidewinder on the water is sufficient fun for me. It's not that much environment depending anymore. Just to be on the water, the Sidewinder is really, I don't know, I really enjoy it. I really have a great time doing this.
Yeah. And when you think back to my diving again, a lot of mine is open water, ocean, boat diving as well. And I've got to be honest, I don't really believe it's the best tool necessarily for getting on and off of a boat. I'm working on trying to make that look really smooth and slick, but it's not as good as walking up to the edge of a cave and walking in and standing and putting your gear on. But having said that, I definitely am getting smoother and smoother at making that work. And as soon as I'm in the water, boom, then got all of the advantages that we just talked about. I don't know if I'm one of a very few who are ocean diving the Sidewinder, but it's bloody amazing for that as well.
Plenty of that last year.
Oh, you did?
I did plenty of ocean diving, yeah.
We'll have to swap tips on getting on and off of boats then. Actually, I'm going to do some video on that later. Let's move on a bit because I really want to dig into something that I consider was a genius move, and that was the combination, let's call it, of KISS Rebreathers, with two of my other favorite brands now, with xDeep, who I've had a personal relationship with now since 2013, since I started diving the xDeep Stealth Classic. And then, of course, now I've just got my Seal dry suit, which I'm falling very quickly in love with. It's been amazing. So what a move to combine these together under one umbrella. Can you share a bit about the thinking behind this and how it came about?
It's a bit of a complex question because I'm not 100% sure how much I'm allowed to share about this and not. But I think it's quite simple. So Piotr, the owner of xDeep, and we go almost back to the beginning of xDeep. I think by the time I joined xDeep, there was like 9 dealers. And, Piotr may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was like about 8 or 9 dealers at that time, and they were all in Poland. So it was a rather small company in Poland, and Piotr did it like as a side passion project to his real job, was being an engineer in home automation and, being in really big companies and doing his thing there. But I think the one thing where he always trusts me no matter what is if I'm truly passionate about something and I tell him this is it. And in this case with KISS, I swear to God, he believed me blind 100% because he's not even rebreather certified and he doesn't have rebreathers. But I was just going on and on and on and on how the Sidewinder has completely and utterly transformed my diving and my diving life. How suddenly, even being in open water, just doing whatever bullshit dive, I just have such a great time doing it. And I can't wait to be back in the water. And not only me, that I'm teaching people that are diving instructors for 15, 20 years that go in lakes in Europe on the weekends. And suddenly they're like, my course canceled. So finally I get to fun dive on the weekend with the Sidewinder in the lake. So if something can rekindle that love and that passion that you have for diving, I think that is so worthwhile. And at the same time, I had a really great relationship with Mike Young from KISS Rebreathers because from the beginning when I joined, I had some input to what I would like to change a little bit and also my numbers, right? I was selling a crazy amount of rebreathers in really, really short time. I also tried to make their life as easy as possible. I had like my own order form that would make it easy for them to put invoices together and stuff like this. So I tried to make their life easier. And at the same time, I was really passionate. So when Mike said that he's thinking about selling the company, I called Piotr and it took me about 2.3 minutes to convince him to go for it. And I think, truth be told, maybe we did not know exactly what we're getting into in that moment. But in the same time, sometimes we're laughing about it because we say, wow, if we would have known all of the things that come with it, we might have said no to so many things that we did because it turned out to be so much work and so much stress and so much headache. But now that we're in it, there's no other way than forward. So I think the KISS Sidewinder is like a project like that. At the very beginning, it was like, wow. A couple of months into the game, we realized, wow, this is like hectic. I'm still in that phase a little bit. But now that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, and things fall in their place, and I'm really unbelievable stoked. I think, truth be told, it might be the biggest project I ever undertook in my professional career in diving. And it may be the biggest thing that I did in my life in diving. So I'm very excited about it. Still terrified, but also very, very excited.
A lot of my career has been in entrepreneurship. I've got a master's degree in business and entrepreneurship and started and built a lot of companies. So I know exactly what you're going through. You feel like you're in a tornado when you're starting companies, and it's always that way. And especially when it's something like this where you've got this market demand for it as well. So yeah, I know that feeling. I've been there myself, and it's a lot of fun, but a lot of work. I get that. And I think one of the exciting things from me as a Sidewinder diver, there's so many of us out there diving the Sidewinder now. We love the current Sidewinder, but it's always been clear that there are many improvements that can and could be made to it. Good example is tapping threads into Delrin. That's been a common criticism for the ports on the heads. And I know you guys set Facebook on fire with all of the teasers that you put out during the boot show. It's crazy to read all the comments and see just how passionate everyone was about what was coming. And it was interesting to see the criticism of you not telling us all the details. And I actually jumped on there and reminded a couple of people that this was supposed to be a teaser, so the detail is coming later. And I hope this interview is actually part of that. So what I'd like to do now is dive into the Sidewinder 2. Maybe we could move around the closed circuit of the rebreather and talk about each of the innovations that have been made in the Sidewinder 2, why they've been made and why they're improvements to the current model. And perhaps we start at the DSV. I didn't see anything in particular on that, and then move to the exhale side. Going to throw it to you, Patrick. You go around. I'll jump in if I want to ask a question.
I want to rewind just a tiny little bit. So at the very beginning, when we bought the company, the main idea was not to do crazy amounts of improvement because, like you said, everybody loved the Sidewinder. Work of breathing is really amazing, super easy to put together, super lightweight, very, very fast, everything is easy. There were some small details, like you said, the metal threading into the Delrin. Some of the fittings were not really super ideal. Some craftsmanship, pretty easy, straightforward for us to fix. But of course, a very, very important point for us being a European company was that it has to be CE certified, right? And a huge part of our market, obviously Central Europe, as well as the UK. And we knew we need to have CE certification because if not, it would not be allowed to sell, buy, or teach on a unit. Now, in CE certification, when the CE test is done, the rules of the CE test are really quite intense. It's 1.6 liters of CO2. I don't think many people can deal with that figure or can imagine that figure, so that doesn't matter. 40 liters per minute respiratory volume. So I think many of the divers know 40 liters per minute is quite a high breathing rate. 4 degrees, which I have no idea what that in Fahrenheit is. I guess like 38 Fahrenheit-ish of water temperature. And it is conducted at 40 meters. So the basic test is conducted to 40 meters. Although most companies do a profile, which means they say sometime at 40 meters, usually about 40 minutes. Then they do sometime in 15 meters, usually about 5 to 10 minutes. And then they do the rest in 9 meters, right? They do like a profile. So honestly, we did not really know the thing about the profile. So we just stayed in 40 meters also to see what the real number would be. And with the current or older Sidewinder 1 version, we would only reach just short of 50 minutes, which is not really competitive. And then there's another part of the CE certification test where you check for overbreathing. So you do like double the values and you need to be able to do a certain amount of time. And that was completely impossible to pull off. So suddenly we realized, hang on a second. It's not that we have to do some small little detail changes and we can launch it to the market. No. We are like back to the drawing board. And even people don't realize that because obviously they're not part of this process. But for a year and something, we had weekly endless conference calls. We built more different prototypes, thicker, longer, crazy amount of different designs and options. We had one that was pretty cool, but the way it opened and closed, it looked like a coffin. And then we realized, hey, it looks like a coffin, and we cannot build something that looks like a coffin. And the diving industry.
There's already enough talk of rebreathers killing you without one that actually looks like it.
So there was the yellow box of death, and then there would have been the coffin. So we had to literally completely shred that idea simply because the way the marketing would come across. Nowadays, they compare to milk cartons or Fiji water bottles, which I find way more endearing than a coffin. So there was a lot of time spent doing that, which, maybe not necessarily everybody appreciates the amount of time and effort that went into what there is now. Same time, I earned a crazy amount of grief from the professional community because in that moment, when the Sidewinder became so popular, but we didn't really know where we're going to go with the Sidewinder and what's going to happen, we made the decision to stop instructor training in that particular moment because we felt it was just ethically not correct to train a whole bunch of instructors for maybe something that will not exist in that form any longer and be like, oh, hey, by the way, all of you people that just dropped thousands of dollars of instructor training, by the way, this is all useless now and you have to do something else. So for this and for other reasons also, there was like just so many instructors getting trained in so short period of time that we also had serious concerns about quality. And we made the decision that for sure there's always a financial motivation behind running a business, but people that know me know I'm a bit of an idealist when it comes to diver training. And so therefore we wanted to make instructor training just way more thorough, which by current standards, people have to, no matter what level they have to assist 3 full classes. They have to see 2 different instructors during these classes. And only then are they allowed to spend time with an instructor trainer and ultimately getting evaluated. So we made this process quite long and intense. Basically, this is why we spent quite some time from the moment when the company was acquired until finally we went a bit public and said, hey, this is the things that we did. And in this time, we were criticized a lot. I think specifically me, because it was launched on the internet. Oh, Patrick's the training director and he stops the instructor training. So I got a lot of grief from people about that. And so this was quite an intense time for me personally, just getting attacked from people that I didn't even know. And I thought like, hey, I really didn't want to hurt nobody's feelings with any of those things. And at the same time, it was just like, all of you ask me for information and, hey, what's the news and what's going to happen? And I can't answer it because we literally don't know it ourselves, because we're still at the drawing board at that moment. So that was a really quite difficult time. Good. So let's roll back to the changes that we ultimately did, because then it's also like a domino effect. Once you start to change one thing, you realize, well, you know what? We could also change that. And hey, as you're already doing this, right? And we're going to get this CE certified, and we drop a crazy amount of money and getting CE certification. It would be insane to certify something that we don't really believe or trust in, only to recertify something else a couple of years later. Also for users, right? You don't want to produce something, sell it to people, and then 2 years later go like, oh yeah, that's old now, there's a new product. And it's this the xDeep general philosophy. We are building modular systems, right? The idea to upgrade or to change, not having like two complete separate units, but having one unit that has more capabilities. You mentioned, for example, diving off a boat, right? It's questionable. Is it really so good to have side mount off a boat? Or maybe having the cans mounted to a backplate with a single tank bailout / diluent tank would be a better solution. But anyways, I'm drifting off the topic.
Yes.
So things that we have changed. When you move to the right-hand side, to the exhalation side, right, then you would come first to the exhalation head. The first thing that people will realize, the heads are way shorter, way smaller, more compact. The craftsmanship is increased a lot. For example, there is now metal thread fittings inside the heads. We have a robot arm that basically melts them into the heads with pressure and heat. When you screw a hose into the head, it's metal on metal instead of metal on Delrin. So this was the easiest change. Well, easiest change. The robot arms are expensive. But other than that, it was the
when
thing
you
that we
break them,
identified.
right?
Yeah. But it was,
I was in the
was,
classroom when you were talking to Piotr about I broke the robot.
yeah. He broke the robot 2 times already, actually. But it was fixable, but he broke it 2 times already.
Yes.
And then the next thing that we identified that people complained about was the ADV, right? And you realize maybe on all the forums and on Facebook groups, one of the things, the first up configurations people do is they remove the ADV and they plug it, right? Because they feel that it fires too easy or it doesn't really do what they want it to do. So a lot of people make that modification. And I don't know, like an ADV, you can have different opinions about it, right? I know that Jacek, for example, uses almost exclusively the ADV and doesn't use the MAV a lot. He has an RB80 background. And first, I considered it to be really not a great idea. And I was convinced that we meet with each other, that I would convince Jacek to change his mind. And then we met, we dove together. He explained me how he uses it, and it made brilliant sense. And I said, Jacek, just do exactly what you do. Don't change at all. Maybe it's not my personal preference, but it made perfect sense what he explained, and I had really no counter argument. So what we did now, and this is also how I see the ADV, right? The ADV, even if you don't use it, it's like a seatbelt, right? I'm not using a seatbelt, but it's nice to have it in the moment I need it. Having a more functional ADV was the goal. And what we did was we placed basically a second stage in it that is adjustable. So people that have different flavors, like maybe somebody's in photography, videography, wants to have a softer ADV, a more sensitive ADV, and maybe people that are into cave diving, right, want a harder or not so sensitive ADV. So this is very, very easy, changeable or adjustable with an Allen wrench. Then the really new and powerful innovation and change to the exhalation head is the purge valve. So we have an OPV, not on top of the canister, but on its front side. As it's still an exploration unit, the parts are interchangeable with other parts of the rebreather. So the one-way valve that we ended is a mushroom valve, the exact same one that you have in your DSV, right? So this seals it as a first layer. And then you have a spring, and you have the gasket of a BCD dump valve. So this is your second layer. And it's an OPV, which means it's a downstream valve, so overpressure opens it, right? So very, very similar to your dump valve on a BCD. So what this allows you to do is, if you would lose the mouthpiece or you remove the mouthpiece by accident without closing it, or you have a minor leak somewhere in your rebreather, what you can do is you can roll to the right, because inside your rebreather, like when you're atmospheric pressure, you can move the water around. Water is going to go just to the lowest point, just forced by gravity. So I can roll to the right and the water's going to go into the right canister, and then I can tilt my right shoulder down and now the water runs into the right head. So this would be if the rebreather flooded or had water or small leak somewhere in the rebreather, right? You can direct that water into the right head. Would that make the absorbent wet? Yes. But generally the right-hand side, the exhalation side absorbent is generally wet to begin with because of the chemical process, and as well as condensation, heat difference, and your spit, saliva, and so forth. If you just remove the DSV and you put it back, you can actually quite easily direct the water just to the head without touching the canister. Now what you're going to do is you have to close the DSV because your lip tension is not as strong as the spring tension of the OPV. So you take a breath, you close the DSV. Still with the purge valve being at the lowest point, you press the MAV, you create overpressure in the rebreather, and you push the water through the purge valve out. It's very, very similar to clearing your mask. And in the moment you hear the bubbles going, you basically just open the DSV and let the rest of the bubbles bypass your lips. I've done this drill now a couple of times. The most nerve-wracking time was when Ed was filming me in like 1 point depth.
I saw the video.
But yeah, and it took me also 2 times to get all the water out. It's not an easy maneuver, I'm not going to lie. But neither it's easy. And 90% of rebreathers that actually even have the capability of doing this. But it was not super complicated either. I mean, I managed to do it without touching the floor or hitting the water surface in very shallow water. So I consider it to be pretty feasible. So this is something that is a complete new feature that I think is quite cool. It's something that people wanted. I think people that use the first version of Sidewinder know, even if you do remove the mouthpiece and you put it back in and you get that water passing the exhalation canister and keep it in the counterlung, it's really not a huge problem to dive with quite an impressive amount of water in the Sidewinder without having any problems. And the Sidewinder, besides that, is also one of the only unit that I know where you can actually not only hear there's water in it, but you can also feel it because you can feel the vibration against your right lower back or your kidney side. So having like an accidental or surprising caustic cocktail in your mouth, I would consider to be pretty much impossible. So I did not consider this to be a very unbelievable necessary feature, but it was certainly a feature that the market or that people demanded because the number one question I got is, but what about the water trap? Which is kind of funny because by definition, the counterlung of the Sidewinder is literally built like a water trap. But I think this was just something that we could pull off without making the rebreather worse. Which is also important, right? You don't want to just do innovation, but actually make the core product worse. You want to give what people want or what the market wants, but without making the core product worse. So and I think we managed to do this really cool. I mean, truth be told, is Piotr's idea. I just helped with the execution, but the whole principle thought behind it is 100% him. I take zero credit for that. I just helped a little bit with the placement and the general understanding of what we need, and it works absolutely amazingly.
Yeah, and I think given that you need an OPV anyhow, it's a very clever way of achieving the idea of having a water dump from the Sidewinder. So yeah, I really like that.
And by the way, there is rebreathers that don't have an OPV, but that's another story.
Yeah. I've had those conversations with people, though, like venting gas out of the loop when you're ascending, for instance, by burping at the...
By opening the DSV over your head. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just so much easier, the old Sidewinder, just to push your elbow onto the OPV and dump gas. It's just so simple. I just wonder why you wouldn't want to do that.
So it's one point important to understand. So when we talk about the OPV, the downstream valve, we refer to it now as purge valve. And it's on the exhalation side, on the right-hand side, not to be confused. Because there's some stuff going on in Facebook where people just confused the two valves and then made pretty weird statements about the unit without ever having seen or touched it and just made wrong comments. And not because lack of intelligence, but just because of a misunderstanding of where what was. Then we come to the canisters, right? And the canisters was the thing that needed the most innovation in order to get the CE numbers. Well, the numbers that are required to pass CE, as well as you don't only want to pass CE, you want to have numbers that can compete with the rest of the market, right? So there's a bunch of things that were done. So first of all, the gas flow is still axial, right? I saw some people on the internet going like, oh, the new Sidewinder employs a radial design. It's not a radial. The gas flow is still axial, but the characteristics of a radial are in our axial absorbent. So what does that mean? So if we stand the Sidewinder up, the gas doesn't flow from north to south, but it actually flows from east to west. So basically, it's still an axial gas flow through the absorbent, but we change the direction of the axis. So that means we have a very short bed length. So the distance that you have to breathe through absorbent is much shorter, right? But the surface area is much larger. So that means we have a better dwell time. The gas goes slower through the absorbent, spends more time with the absorbent. And in the same time, the work of breathing is literally half of the former design.
Wow.
It's specifically wow, because it has more than 1 kilo of more absorbent material in total. The new version is Sidewinder 2, which honestly, by the way, we don't really know if that's going to be the name. But the Sidewinder 2 has 3.2 kilos of 812 or 797, something like 812 mesh absorbent material. So it's already really impressive to have half, but it's really specifically impressive having half considering there's 1 kilo of more sorbed material. So this also explains the square canister design, right? Because people go like, oh, why is it square now? Well, because that's the direction of the axis that the gas flows through. So if you would keep it round, you would have shorter distances on the edges than you have in the middle. So you can't have that. Also inside where you exhale, that portion where the gas goes in, that's also angled. Piotr did an extreme amount of testing in regards to how the gas flows through the absorbent canister. He did infrared pictures that I'm going to post at some point, some stuff on Facebook also, where you can actually see the chemical front, so where the sorb reacts with CO2. He had pressure sensors that actually measured the pressure drop in each part of the rebreather, because the idea was really to make a breathing channel that would force the gas to go as linear through the absorbent canister as possible and to really maximize the efficiency. Besides that, one of the really big issues that we had with the Sidewinder 1 was diving in very cold water. Because, I mean, something that's really nice on the Sidewinder is how fast and easy it is to put it together, right? Because you basically just fill the sorb straight into the canisters, you put the lid on, you go dive. When in other units, you fill it into an absorbent canister, then you put the canister into a canister, and then you put the lid on. But of course, putting a canister inside a canister has the advantage of having a warm gas layer that keeps or that protects the absorbent canister from the environment, from the cold water outside. And you don't have to be a chemist to understand that in cold temperature, any chemical process is just slower. This was an issue for us because we couldn't get less than 50 minutes in that sea testing. So that was not a good number. So with the new absorbent design, which is a kilo more sorb, a different axis in gas flow, as well as insulating it much better using a different material, as well as inside the wall, there's an actual gas layer that has an equalizing hole at the bottom of the canister. So we're not only using the material to insulate our absorbent canister, we also use a gas layer. And it ultimately brought us to 163 minutes, which is obviously a vast increase of the former number. And again, I need people to remember, it's 163 minutes in 40 meters constant. So this was not a profile. So if we do a profile, it's going to be, of course, different numbers, but we haven't had the chance to go back to the lab yet and do a profile test also. Any questions to the canister?
So given that it's got an extra kilo in sorb, how much bigger is it than the existing canisters?
It's a bit of an optical illusion because when you see it, it definitely looks bulkier. That was like my first reaction, right? When I saw it, I was like, oh, that looks bulkier. When you get closer, you realize it depends also a little bit if you do have the warm water Sidewinder or the cold water Sidewinder. The cold water Sidewinder, the ring that closes the lid to the canister, it finishes off with the insulation part. So this is exactly the same on the current version. The four sides are in line with the closing ring. However, we have the four corners, right? And also because we don't have any longer a shorter body, and then the bottom part was just a 90-degree flunge, so to speak, was just a 90-degree elbow from the canister to lead into the counterline. All of this space, all of this real estate is used now to be filled with sorb. Right. So generally speaking, the new canisters with the head have exactly the same height. The four walls are in line with the closing ring, so that's the same as an insulated one. But we do have the four corners. Having said that, I don't think there's a restriction that you can pass with Sidewinder 1 that you cannot pass with Sidewinder 2. Because still your shoulders, your body, and ultimately if you keep the tanks on, the tanks are larger and wider than the canisters itself.
Yeah, and you haven't had any issue with the corners themselves catching on something, for instance?
No, I did in 2019 or something, when people criticized me putting the counterlung inside the buoyancy compensator and having the canisters therefore mounted a little bit higher, because I wanted to have my side mount tanks exactly where they were. I didn't want the side mount tanks suddenly to be lower just because I'm diving a Sidewinder. So I'd rather move the canisters a bit higher up so that the tanks can go in the same place, because I'm a skinny guy, right? And then people are like, oh, but when you pass through restrictions, you're going to just, rip off the towers and so forth and so forth. And then there's this little bullshit swim through no mount restriction in the open water of Ponderosa, because it's not the back in Mexico. It's in open water. It's in 2.8 meter depth. It's the easiest thing in the planet. But basically, I went through there with Sidewinder 1 and did a video, honestly, just to rub it in those people's faces. I was like, hey, you see, I can still pass the no mount restriction just fine, even when the canisters are a little bit higher. And the video went crazy viral. And I was just demolished by thousands of recreational divers around the world that criticized how I would endanger my life passing through a no mount restriction, doing it. I could get stuck there and then drown. And I thought, Jesus, you people would know what we're doing kilometers away from the entrance.
Yeah. Every time I post a video of, and mate, as you well know, I'm nowhere near at your level. However, I do restrictions, and every single time somebody makes a comment regarding my safety, and trust me, I'm the one most concerned about my safety, much more concerned than anybody else.
Yeah. So I did the same restriction with Sidewinder 2, And if you watch the Sidewinder 1 video, you realize I'm actually getting stuck with the inhalation, the apex, the high profile apex off. And it takes me some time to wiggle with the new heads because they're lower in profile and rounder. I actually got stuck with my waist belt buckle. And you can see that in the video. Like I'm getting stuck, I can't move anymore. And then I reach down and I put the buckle back in and then I pop out. So it actually, I kind of felt that I passed through the restriction easier than I did with the Sidewinder 1. But again, that might be the angle I chose or, a good day versus a bad.
And I guess it's just like anything. I mean, if you're stuck, it's a wiggle left, wiggle right, wiggle back, wiggle forward, and eventually you clear whatever it is or you figure out what it is and solve that problem.
The truth be told, from, I don't know, close to 200 people I trained over the past 4 or 5 years, an extreme majority were recreational divers that dive in lakes and quarries in the ocean, that don't participate in deep diving and that don't participate in cave diving. So for those people, the size or the streamlining should maybe most likely matter the least.
Let's go back to another question. So I heard something about the way that you pack sorb into the new canisters. So can you describe how sorb is packed in these canisters?
Yes, it's still loaded in the same way from the top. So in order not to get sorb into the breathing channel, we have a metal ring on the inside that you can move around and you can block the breathing channels to fill the sorb. And then you open it back up. If you keep it closed by accident and you close the lid and you forgot about it, you cannot perform any pre-dive checks. You can't do cell calibration. You can't do positive. You can't do negative. You can't breathe from it. It's people go like, oh, but what if, if it's closed? Well, what if the DSV is closed? You also can't breathe from it. It's really, really, really straightforward. It cannot happen accidentally that you're underwater and that thing closed. That doesn't happen. So you're still top loading it. But the way that Piotr designed it, in order to get what we refer to as channeling, right? So imagine you did not do a good job packing it. And now through vibration, there's settling and the absorbent goes packs closer together and creates an empty space on the top. Like most absorbent canisters, also ours has a spring on top of it. So if there is settling happening, the spring is going to make up for that space. The way that it's designed, you would literally have to grossly underfill the absorbent canister. I mean, I talk about maybe only 70% or 80% of the absorbent canister filled, 20% empty for that to happen. I would consider it next to impossible with a 5-minute explanation of how to do it. So then you pack it, you tap it, you pack it straightforward as usual. And then you have what I call the plunger. There's no other name for it at the moment. But we have a lid with a spring that keeps that in place. And then you put the head on top of it. And the head, because it's a central spring, the head is actually still turnable when it is put together. We do plan also eventually maybe to sell the old style canisters for people that dive purely warm water or not in CE territory. We plan to maybe sell those canisters, or people still have those canisters. You can buy the canisters as a spare part. And we're just going to provide a mesh with a central spring also. You will be able to use it with the new head. It's also retro and future upgradable.
Yeah. I did see a comment about a temp stick as well, and something that's coming to mind for me for a lot of the diving I do is quite often I'm going out on a weekend and doing, say, 2 1.5-hour dives, which I would do without changing the sorb, but I would change it at about that 3-hour point, i.e. I wouldn't do another 1.5-hour dive on top of that. But now with so much more sorb in there, that is going to allow longer durations, of course. Was there thought to put a temp stick in or anything like that?
Not at this point in time. I think when we're going to do the last CE testing with profiles, we will give recommendations based on the CE value. Of course, I'm always getting this question, right? And people go like, so how long can you dive with the Sidewinder? What's the duration of it? And the reality is, it's literally like asking somebody, how long does a 10-liter tank last? Because there's so many variables in it. Of course, there is, how much CO2 you produce, right? But this is not even the biggest variable in it. The biggest variable from my point of view is how much diluent do you put through it, right? Because if it is a closed circuit, which means there's literally just that breath that goes around, of course, there's going to be way more wear and tear on the absorbent material than if you're constantly injecting new gas. Why would you inject constantly new gas? Well, for example, if you sawtooth profile in a cave, if I constantly go up and down, when I go up, I need to vent gas. And when I go back down, I need to put new gas in. And obviously, the new gas from a cylinder has 0 CO2 in it. So obviously, the wear and tear on the absorbent material is much less, and you could potentially dive much longer. And then, of course, a huge variable is water temperature also. So when people ask me that question, it's almost impossible to answer it, because if you give a real genuine answer, then people will be like, oh, this is too aggressive. And then, of course, it depends a million other variables, like how sensitive are you to CO2? Are you a CO2 retainer? How confident do you feel underwater? And many other things. So I think that the recommendations that we will do are going to be mostly based on the CE levels, which of course, in my opinion, crazy exaggerated, but this is the recommendations that we're going to give. And for sure, because of having a kilo more sorb, doing another 1.5 hours seems very, very reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more question relating to channeling as well. So one of the issues that Ed warned me about is if you're putting the Sidewinder in your back of your truck and driving to a dive site, obviously there's vibration occurring and you should try and set the canisters upright. And I'm often driving a couple of hours to dive sites. And so this give you the ability to lay them flat, or should you still be looking to have them upright in terms of avoiding channeling?
It is hard for me to imagine that through pure vibration, you could create so much empty space that the spring wouldn't catch it. So I would almost say it really doesn't matter that much, the orientation, how you store it in your truck. However, I do agree with Ed that the best way of transporting is upright, simply because it occupies way less space. So we have like smaller crates, smaller food crates where the Sidewinder fits in standing just perfectly. And I think it's generally just a good habit to do, because if you should flood your rebreather, and maybe it was not that evident, or maybe just because you did 3 or 4 days of consecutive diving and you have a lot of condensation water in there and water from the chemical process in your saliva, in the moment you lie down, all of this potentially could flow or run towards your oxygen cells, the cabling, everything. And even though on the new head, all of our stuff is waterproof, but I think it's still a pretty good habit to just keep them standing up and make sure that moisture and condensation stays in the counterline.
Yeah, good answers. So we've gone down through the canister on the exhale side and now the counterlung. Is the counterlung remaining basically the same? Are the connections the same?
Yes, the connections are the same and not. We changed the design of the canister openings that just simply make it easier to connect them. It's like a funnel style, just to make sure that the O-rings don't get pushed out of their groove. Because I think most Sidewinder 1 users know that sometimes it's a bit of pain to get the connection going because the O-ring gets pushed out of its groove and goes into the groove of the plastic clip. And then there's a bit of a fighting to get that in there. So we changed that design just to make it more comfortable and easier. The general design of the counterlung, we may or may not change slightly to adapt it a bit better to the xDeep stealth.
Yeah. So just talking about that at the moment, so I'm assuming the counterlung still sits underneath the stealth wing. Is there any thought to putting it inside or changing the design of the stealth or making them work better together?
Yes. but we haven't started.
You can see Patrick's face right now.
but we have obviously, so since I started to do that, first it was really heavily criticized by most people, and now a lot of people are doing the same thing. But yes, I thought it was the slickest, most streamlined way of doing this. So this is why. I did it for 2 reasons. First of all, because I think it's slick and streamlined and easy to get on and off. But second, as I told you, my main objective at the beginning was I wanted to have my side mount tanks where I was used to have them. I didn't want to move to smaller tanks. I wanted to keep aluminum 80s because it's the number one tank I encounter when I travel. And I wanted to have the tanks where I'm used to having them. So I had to move the canisters higher up. And because I'm a small guy, so the stealth wing covers my entire back. So if I would have not cut the holes in it and moved the canisters higher, I would have been able to achieve that. So that was the principal idea behind it. And yes, we are for sure planning something, because right now there's so many people that ask me how to do that. So we're definitely planning to do something like it, but of course still with a buoyancy compensator, creating space. Ultimately, once we move to it, considering all the experience Piotr and I have building buoyancy compensators and harnesses, and this is going to take us maybe a few days. Yep. I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for that. After you and I did our training together, I've come back to New Zealand and rebuilt my new one. So I'm using a Stealth 2.0 Rec now, and it's all set up the way that you showed me, and I'm really, really loving it. It feels amazing. And again, for a guy of my size, similar to you, I don't need the size of the tech harness at all, nor do I need the lift of it. So it's just brilliant. Very, very happy with the changes I've made. All right, let's move it on. So we've got to the inhale side now, inhale canister. I'm assuming it's identical to the exhale.
It is exactly identical, yes.
Gas flows in the opposite direction, but exactly the same way, just in reverse.
Yes, and then we come to the head. And obviously, from experience, something that we suffered a little bit in the Sidewinder 1 was ultimately when you would do a lot of consecutive days of diving without taking the rebreather apart, you would have quite a lot of residual water in there, right, from the chemical process, from the saliva, a lot from condensation. And then ultimately, over the course of a couple of days, if you would roll to the left, that water would go from the counterlung into the inhalation canister, go through the inhalation canister, turn caustic if it wasn't caustic already. And then it's not the problem that it touches the oxygen cells. What is the problem is when it touches the Molex connectors and the wiring behind the oxygen cell. And then basically we would call it the Christmas tree. When your handset would go like red, yellow, and numbers would go up and down, and okay, there's caustic water on my Molex connectors. Now, by itself is not a problem, right? If people come out of the water, that doesn't mean that you have to ascend, do an emergency ascend and run. No, or for sure, go open circuit because you don't know what gas you're breathing in. Come to the surface, make your way to a bathroom, a water bottle, whatever, and take it apart and rinse everything. Oxygen cells have a coated circuit board in the back. So truth of the matter is you can hold it under the sink and clean it with fresh water, touch it with the tongue, make sure there's not that battery feeling, and make sure that the caustic water is gone, and then just let them dry. Specifically in instructor training, I have flooded my rebreather more times than I can remember, specifically also in the Red Sea, which has more salt than most other oceans. And same experience. You just have to come out, thoroughly rinse it, and then let it dry. And I literally, in my entire life, never had a cell even lose 0.1 millivolts. And of course, you have to wash the Molex connector also very thoroughly. I think people are so worried of putting water on electric parts that they just don't do a good job with that. And of course, caustic water is extremely corrosive. So then if they let that stuff sit in with caustic residue on it, you're going to break the cells and you're going to break the cable. So, I mean, compared to the number, really nothing. Compared to the number of rebreathers we have in one area. But we had a few problems with the Molex cables, then just turning all black. It's also quite an easy fix. You put it in ácido muriático. I only know the Spanish name, like the bathroom cleaner acid. And you can strip that black oxidation from the cable, and then you can solder it back on, or you can crimp it back on to the Molex connector, and it would work. But that caused some problem, and this was something that we wanted to fix. So in the Sidewinder 2, we have a printed circuit board that has the Molex connectors on the circuit board itself, so there's no more wiring. The cell basically just plugs onto it. And not only that, around the Molex plug, there is a silicone, like a neck seal or like a silicone gasket. And it actually seals on the back of the cell in two places to make that connection from the cell to the circuit board waterproof. The back side of the circuit board has also a silicone insulation ring around the wiring. So in one of my recent tests, I'm going to be 100% honest with you here, I actually only dove with 2 cells. And I had forgotten about having only 2 cells. But yet, while I was underwater, I thought, it's not that I had forgotten about it. It's just in that moment, I thought, hey, I'm going to test the flood-proof tolerance of my rebreather. And I opened the mouthpiece and I flooded the complete rebreather. And I swam around and I thought, wow, this is so awesome. No Christmas tree. The cells are still perfect. And then after about 20 odd minutes, suddenly it was Christmas tree. I'm like, why does it go into Christmas tree? And then I realized, oh, yeah. There's actually 1 cell missing. So ultimately, the water found its way in through that one empty Molex connector, found its way to the wiring. And then I was in the salt water of Ponderosa. So then it created a short. Funny enough, though, I came out of the water, took everything apart, rinsed it thoroughly in fresh water. It then sat in the rebreather room for 3 days because I had nonstop conference calls and was on the computer all day. And then when I finally went there and put everything back together, everything works again perfect. And it's literally the rebreather I have with me right now in Europe to conduct a course in Switzerland pretty soon. Also, in that head, because we have so much real estate left, we have the 3 oxygen cells, but we have space for 2 more cells. And we could potentially put more oxygen cells, but we maybe think more about putting actually CO2 cells. If people want, right? This is like your personal preference upgrade possibility. Yeah. And historically, CO2 cells have a bit of a bad reputation because in the moment there's moisture or water droplets on the cell face, they cease to work. So people put like silica gel or silica bags or like tampons or whatever to absorb that moisture. But we don't really have this problem on a Sidewinder because usually our cell faces are bone dry to begin with because all of the moisture, condensation, and heat is all on the exhalation side, but our cells are on the inhalation side, right? And besides that, even if there would be moisture, we have a waterproof seal from the cell to the circuit board also. And so generally, I think the execution of CO2 cells in our rebreather should work pretty flawlessly.
I think that would be awesome. What's the value of additional O2 cells? Is this kind of additional redundancy or...
This is a long conversation, Steve. I don't really want to get into right now.
Let's not go there. Wondering whether my amazing Shearwater petrol will display 5 cells, let alone have them. But a CO2 cell, you can understand how that would be valuable. And of course, the reason that I've always heard previously is that they're just not reliable. And so if we can have a reliable method of detecting CO2 in the circuit.
There is a manufacturer that has a rebreather with 5 cells. There's a wonderful article on the internet about the reasons behind it. I would recommend everybody before they form an opinion to actually read the article and then form your own opinion on it. And people should do whatever they feel most comfortable with. And who am I to tell you how many oxygen cells you should have or if you should have a CO2 cell or not? I think at the end of the day, everybody needs to make an educated decision and then go with their gut feeling and balance financial possibilities, safety, fun, and anything else you think is important to make this decision. And then last but not least, on that inhalation head, we still have a valve on the top side of it. Similar, if not the same location than the Apex dump valve or Apex OPV was. It's way more low profile. I'm not going to go into millimeters because I always guess that stuff wrong, but it's very, very low profile. Yet, it is still very easy to trigger in the same fashion with your triceps area, like the chicken wing movement, how we call it, which was something when I saw it originally, I was really concerned about. And I think one of the first things I said to Piotr, I think we need to make this like a bit more high profile because it's going to be really hard to reach. And then from the first moment I tried it in the water, it was super easy to reach it actually.
Sure.
Now this we call the flush valve. Remember on the exhalation side, we had the purge valve. So there was a downstream OPV water going out. On the inhalation side, we have the flush valve, which is an upstream valve, which means it opens against the direction of gas flow. So it's not an OPV because overpressure would actually seal it more, not open it. So you have to mechanically force it open against the direction of the expanding gas. But again, this is an exploration unit or a unit with capability for exploration, meaning little amount of spare parts and exchangeable parts. So we have the same flapper valve again in there as we have in the purge valve, as we have in the DSV. And we have the same gasket that we have in the dump valve of ABCD. Just the spring is now on the opposite direction, right? So the spring pushes from the inside out. The dump valve of the BCD closes it outwards. And there's a pretty strong spring in it. So that means you have to mechanically press it with your triceps. So when would you do that? There's two main applications for that. First of all, flush your rebreather when you open circuit. Let's say you swim around, you look on your computer, everything is flushing red. You have no idea why. And your first instinct is just go to something that you know, right? And we all have had plenty of experience diving open circuit before we move to closed circuits. So let's go to something we know. In Sidewinder configuration, we have usually the necklace right underneath our chin. So swapping DSV for second stage should be something that is done in a heartbeat in an instant. Let's say I have the experience and the knowledge and the comfort level to identify what my problem on the rebreather was, be able to fix it as well, and then have the possibility to return to my rebreather. And of course, before I want to return to my rebreather, I want to make sure that the gas in the rebreather is breathable. And I can do this on a Sidewinder with the comfort of being open circuit, meaning I'm breathing gas that is not intoxicating me, that gives me a clear mind and no stress. And for most people, when they start rebreather diving, still maybe better and easier buoyancy than on a closed circuit rebreather. Now they just have to open the OPV with their triceps. Now you can open it already, even if no gas comes out, no water will go in, because even when you open it, remember there's the one-way valve right underneath it, right? So it will keep water from going into the rebreather. So I'm depressing the flush valve. I gently roll with my right shoulder down. Now the gas in the canister, in the right, and the exhalation canister is going to move along through the counterlung, through the inhalation canister and exit my rebreather. That by itself creates an underpressure. That underpressure draws in the membrane of the ADV of the second stage. And now the ADV is going to add the exact amount of gas to your rebreather that exited through the flush valve, which means even beginners can amazingly flush their rebreather without losing buoyancy, not even by an inch or a centimeter. It's a very, very easy and straightforward technique to do that. And once they flush the rebreather in this way, they can return back to the rebreather and keep on diving. The other use for this flush valve is in case you did have to go open circuit bailout and you have to actually terminate your dive on open circuit, you still need to manage and control the expanding gas of your counterlung. So as we're ascending, we can periodically vent gas hands-free, right? Because we use our left arm triceps to push on it. For example, in a cave diving situation, I could have, one hand on the body, one hand on the line. Same. I don't need a hand for it. And as I'm ascending, I can just dump gas very easily from the rebreather and then just raise my arm and dump gas from my triceps. So it's a very smooth movement where you can control the expanding gas in your suit and in the counterlungs at the same time. So this is the purpose of this valve.
Brilliant. And we make our way back to the loop and back to the DSV. The assumption from me is the DSV remains the same. No need to change that.
For the moment, I would say so. And the same is true for the MAV. We have stuff on the MAV on the drawing board that makes it a bit more ergonomic, I guess. We also want to separate the buttons, one on one side of the MAV and one on the other side of the MAV. While we're doing all of this design work, at the same time, we're spending a lot of time and effort in a very rigorous patent process. So we are not only patenting the specific ideas or the specific executions, we're actually patenting the entire concept of it. So this involves an incredible amount of time with lawyers. We're only releasing stuff to the public that we have already patent pending. The rest people need to be a bit more patient.
Fantastic, mate. That was amazing. A couple of questions that have come out of that. We talked about the DSV being changed, and I mentioned to you when we caught up a week ago or a few days ago that I have some very interesting discussions around BOVs with JJ and inspo divers in particular. In the last conversation, he's a good mate. He's a 100-meter CCR diver, rec diver, AP instructor. And he was extremely critical of the fact that we don't have a BOV. And I know they can be retrofitted, but not many of us do that. And his comment was that if you have a hypercapnia event, then you're going to die because it's too complicated to do a bailout with anything other than a BOV. I disagree with that. So I'm interested in your perspective on that in terms of the way that we work with the Sidewinder.
Quite complex question. I had an incredible amount of CO2 episodes in my life. And I have to admit that in one of them, I really would have wished I had a POV. It was my first time in really, really extreme cold water. And there was a lot of different aspects that led to it. First of all, because of so much undergarment and heating and all the stuff that I was wearing, my short hose was really much shorter, right? Because my chest was wider. So my necklace, my regulator didn't sit under my chin, but more like on my right hand collarbone. And the second thing was after 3 hours in 40-degree water, my face, my skin was numb. Plus also how I experienced the CO2 hit in that specific occasion was so different from other times. It was really confusing at the beginning because I got like these massive heat waves running through my body. CO2 is like a really strong vasodilator. So like as my blood vessels open and I'm getting flushed with warm blood, I'm just literally have the feeling I should maybe remove my hood even. So to a certain degree, I can understand where your body is coming from. And I would say there is certain extreme occasions where I would maybe potentially agree with him. For the majority of other experiences that I had with CO2, it was really much slower oncoming. There's a lot of symptoms leading up to it, such as anxiety, shortness of breath, and just a general feeling of like, I don't want to be here anymore. I would really much rather be on the surface. And in those moments, bailing out was really very simple and very straightforward for me. Even on one dive in an early KISS Classic that had a Mares BOV on it, the BOV was not a mushroom valve. It was a flapper valve and a screw that held it in place. And during the dive, for whatever reason, the hole was bigger. Maybe I used too strong disinfectant or I left it in the sun. Don't know. But basically, the exhalation flapper valve popped off the screw. So I basically didn't have an exhalation one-way valve any longer. So every time I inhaled, parts of my exhalation gas came back. So I got a pretty strong CO2 hit on that. Went open circuit. Certainly had to do a couple of pretty big breaths. But then it was a 45-minute open circuit exit swim back to the entrance. And when I calculated my gas consumption, it was pretty much exactly the same. Of course, if I would have had bailed out and went straight to the surface, right? And now you go like, well, I did 5, 6, 7, let's call it 10 really big breaths, but of only 30 breaths total, my gas consumption would have been crazy. But having done 10 really big breaths on 3,000 breaths, it was such a small marginal difference that it really didn't make any difference. So the question that you ask is really so complex because it depends so many different things. In my opinion, if people keep the second stage on the cylinder, so that is really quite far away from their mouth, I believe they should have a BOE. If they have regulate that's very, very close to their mouth, it's more optional, right? Then it depends the type of diving that you do and your comfort level and what you prefer to do. But I will never force people one way or another. If you think you want to have a BOV, mate, go for it. If you don't think you want it, then don't go for it. If you dive with me and you have no BOV, so you're diving a DSV, and your second stage is on your cylinder really far away from your mouth, I will most likely not dive with you because I know I do not consider this to be a safe configuration. And if you have a problem, I'm going to have to deal with it. And then I'd rather say, mate, I'm going to sit that one out. But other than that, I'm not going to force you to do one thing or the other. What I really like about the Sidewinder, extremely, because it doesn't have the T-pieces, you have extreme range of motion with your head to look left and look right. And that would be definitely minimized by having a low-pressure hose attached to the corrugated hose also. And then, of course, the next question is, what tank do you run it off? I think on the Sidewinder, it would be even a bit better because you actually run the BOV off a proper sized cylinder. where most rebreather divers have their BOVs run off very small cylinders. It's like really just a step in between the rebreather and going full open circuit. And if they don't do that, but they use QC6s and then just plug in different gases, now, of course, you open a whole new can of worms because, doing a wrong gas switch, just plugging in a QC6 to a wrong hose is definitely easier than actually going through a switching maneuver that has you, like deploying second stages and going through the switching procedure with your buddy. So I'm afraid I don't have a very easy, straightforward answer to that.
I think you kind of agreed with my point of view, and it was good to get the additional level of detail, you having gone through those experiences as well, because my feeling is that especially as side mount divers, we're so adept and used to switching regulators, and especially switching from a regulator on a necklace and another one on a long hose. And so if you consider the DSV corollary for the long hose, being able to close that, lift it out, and then put another regulator in is a very, very simple maneuver for someone who's done a few hundred side mount dives. And I kind of feel it's an apples with orange argument with the AP guys and JJ guys, because I think they are considering that if it's not a BOV, they are bailing out to a regulator stowed on a bailout cylinder. So they are deploying a hose, getting the hose in position, turning it on, and then trying to breathe from that. Whereas again, for us, it's straight under our neck. And I can even reach on the clip my long hose. So I've got two regulators, one on my chest D-ring and one under my neck. The other point of view is that very few BOVs are high-performance regulators in the same context as the regulators that we're using. So if you're in a hypercapnia situation, bailing out to a high-performance regulator versus a BOV is going to be superior, in my opinion.
Hypothetically, I agree, but we end in the realm of a lot of unknowns. I believe that diving accidents are a lot mental. So if you feel safer having a BOV on, and having the BOV allows you, in a moment of stress and discomfort, to remain just a fraction calmer than you would without one, by all means, go and put one. Because at the end of the day, it's not often the situation itself that kills people, but how they react to it. But if you think about it in diving, specifically in cave diving also, it's not the cave that kills people. It's not the equipment that kills people. It's one problem that maybe gets judged in a wrong way and creates an over dramatic or wrong solution to it that by itself creates more problems, and then you go down the accident slope. But in the same time, doing bold statements like, if you use a shut-off valve, you kill people. If you don't have a heart, you die. I sometimes get a bit like stomach ache when I read or see stuff like that, because it's just so exaggerated and so completely torn out of context. And people insist of constantly having to tell others how they should live or configure their stuff or dive their stuff. It's just like, I don't know. I think sometimes people should just let people do what they want if they feel comfortable and happy that way,
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so let's just round out on the Sidewinder discussion then. So I know you're testing a functional prototype now, the video that you put out. You shared a little bit about that, and I also saw a post that you're looking for a launch somewhere in Q3, Q4 this year. Are you still on track for that? And of course, the big question everyone's asking as well is about pricing and so on. How do you see that playing out over the rest of this year?
You're putting me in the hot seat again. I think we're still very much on track. There was some minor stuff that we swapped in regards to hose routing. We have the new heads getting made right now. I should get them shipped either to Switzerland or right after that I'm in Austria before returning to Mexico. By the time we go to Rebreather Forum in Malta, which I want to use this opportunity to invite everybody to come to Malta in April to join us in the Rebreather Forum, I'm pretty sure we're going to be set by then. As far as production in Poland and assembly in Poland goes, we're pretty much done with that. I think that's also maybe something I shouldn't mention, but something that I'm just going to mention right now. We managed recently to shortcut the waiting list by a lot. So if people had the information that the unit is going to arrive in June, I can tell you it will be much earlier than that. So we have the capability right now to do it. The CE stuff is all in the pipeline, so that's pretty much straightforward to do. If nothing major comes in our way, I'm pretty sure we can launch it by Q3, Q4, maybe more Q4. I'm just going to be a bit more conservative on that side.
Awesome.
Pricing, something that was very important and that we took very serious. We wanted to keep the same or very similar price because we didn't want to be the guys that, you guys bought the company, changed a few things, and then suddenly it's like 2 times the price. That was very important. So we spent a lot of time, besides the whole patent work, was how can we optimize manufacturing and use all the resources, of course, that xDeep has also. How can we use the resources to keep production price, manufacturing cost as low as possible so we can offer the rebreather still at this really, I think, very competitive, very good price to the public. And we wanted to go
Brilliant.
a step further also. In fact, we have future plans to go much further than that. There's going to be upgradable. So this is always going to be a modular system, but it's basically, there's going to be heaps of different configuration options. You can have it side mount. You can strap it to a backplate that we're creating that has space for the count lung in it. So then you have a single tank on your back with the canisters attached. Showed a configuration on boat show. So that would be like for your ribs, your small boats, your giant stride entries, your back roll entries. We have the same for double tank configurations. So people like me or like my team that are very much in love with the general concept of DIR configuration could have a Hogarthian configuration just with a rebreather attached to it. And we also have the plan to have a modular or a gas mixing module that you can attach or connect to the heads. And then you have even an eCCR with 2 solenoids in it. So there's many plans for the future that should allow people to just have one rebreather, but have an extreme amount of versatility in regards to how they want to configure and how they want to use our rebreather. Whether it be for cave diving, dual rebreathers, very extreme depth, cold water, warm water, single tank, dual tank, eCCR, MCCR, and everything in between.
That's super exciting. And I guess it's about that, listening to that and listening to what's coming out. The question that I think I posed a while ago is, as a current Sidewinder diver, do I say, okay, the Sidewinder 1 becomes my backup rebreather and now I'm going to buy a brand new Sidewinder 2? Or do I say, hey, I'm going to stick some modular bits on top of this? And I know there's no right or wrong answer, but I'm kind of thinking I might start out by buying the 2 new heads and fitting them to my existing system. And therefore, I get the advantage of all of the innovations and amazing stuff that's going on in the heads, but keep my current cans. How does that sound?
I think when you see the new cans and you try them the first time, you're going to go with the new cans. Because I'm telling you, this was my thought first. I was like, I'm from Mexico, I'm going to go with the old canisters. But no,
Yeah.
because the other question is also, of course, like, is there going to be additional training for current Sidewinder users to get the new unit? And honestly, this is something that I can't 100% answer yet. Something that I do want to share though also. Another big part of my work the last 2 years was we're creating a very massive online platform. So basically people know the configurator from Seal Dry Suits and from xDeep, the tune-up system. So you basically build your own rebreather online and then just get a code and you order it from your dealer. But it's also going to have a full training calendar on there with all the instructors in the world and where they conduct classes. And you can join classes online. There's going to be chat rooms where we can talk to each other. There's going to be rigorous quality assurance. So instructors are going to evaluate the student. That's normal. But students are also going to evaluate the instructors and assistants. Because obviously, as instructor candidates have to assist 3 classes before they can go to an IT, they will have plenty of chance to be evaluated by instructors. And they will also evaluate the instructors that they assist. So we're spending a lot of time getting like all of the different training agencies aligned, having for each one of their paths, like what different classes they have and so forth as well. So this is completely way out of my comfort zone, web-based beta testing, long conference calls with programmers. Shimon has been a true soldier, a true trooper, talking a Stone Age person like me through based programs and whatnot. But all of these, at the moment, I don't really know how. I need to spend time also obviously get the input from other instructors if they feel that additional training is necessary. What is very important, and I think people that are in my close area, they know that it's not really not about money. Most people know that when people assist us, instructor candidates assist us, even if they have a different instructor trainer, so they get evaluated by a different instructor trainer, they are always welcome in my class to assist free of charge. They just have to pay their fills and their expenses, but I don't charge for the knowledge that I share with them. Also, when people look at it, it's really not about just getting more money from people. But the most important thing is quality and just creating a bunch of safe and happy divers that really enjoy diving the Sidewinder. And it's the same when people want to go from Sidewinder 1 to Sidewinder 2. If we believe there is a safety issue, then I don't know if this can be maybe taught on a Zoom call or if it's necessary to actually meet. And then I don't know what the money should be. But we're going to try to make something that is as fair as possible, but without sacrificing safety.
Got it. Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I was very aware of the work that you were doing with the KISS training. And it just sounds brilliant and sounds like it'll be a big step forward as much as the Sidewinder 2 is an advancement. Everything that sits around it is also advancing so that you've got the support behind it. Can't wait to see more. And I'm a patient man, so I'll sit back. I was hoping I could make it to Malta, and I don't think I will, but I hope you have a great conference in Malta. Anyone else who's going, I'm sure you'll have a great time. It's a great place to dive as well. So brilliant. I don't have too much more, Patrick. Do you have anything that you want to offer in closing on the Sidewinder 2, et cetera, et cetera?
I want to apologize to the many people, specifically the professionals that were, so to speak, kept in the dark, not on purpose, for the past 2 years. I want to apologize for all the people that had to wait for the unit and we're not really sure where KISS is going and what the future will be. It wasn't on purpose. We didn't do this out of any bad intention. It was just situational. We took this project on. We thought it's going to be easier than it turned out to be. And then we were literally working around the clock. And if we didn't put out information, it's simply because we didn't have it, or we did not know really how to present it, or we were not really sure. And in hindsight or in retrospect, could we have done things different? Certainly. Do I regret certain? Yes, for sure. But we best decisions in the moment that we could think of. At the same time, I want to thank everybody for their patience. I want to thank everybody for their interest, and I think mostly for people that just share cool pictures and videos on social media about them using the Sidewinder, and I'm super glad.
Yeah.
And like I said, this is definitely the biggest project of my life. I'm terrified about it because obviously it's so public and we're like so under the magnifying of the world. And most people in my surrounding know I'm a quite private person in my private life. I'm not very sociable. So now suddenly they have like all of this huge spotlight is quite nerve-wracking. But at the same time, I think it's worthwhile. So if there was ever something worthwhile to put myself out there like this, or to put ourselves out there and risk reputation and whatnot, it is this project. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and look, I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, as I related earlier, I've been involved in launching products before. I know exactly what it's like, and it's just never easy. Things never go the way you want them to. It's always harder. It always takes longer, and it always costs more. It's just the way of the world. And as you rightly say, there's many things in hindsight that you learn from that, but that becomes part of your knowledge base that you can employ on additional releases and so on. I think my point of view, which I expressed on some of the teaser posts, was we just have to be a little bit patient. And I appreciate if there's people waiting for units, that's challenging because you're so excited about what's coming. But at the same time, I think it's going to be worth the wait. Certainly my wait to get on the Sidewinder 1 was so worth it. And I am patient enough to, and of course I can keep diving the Sidewinder 1 now until the 2 comes. So I'll be fine. Mate, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing and giving us as much as you can. Am I going to drop you in it by saying there's a video coming?
I just want to say, because I promised that video on the boat show, and I swear to God, the days were so long. And we came back to the apartment complete, and we always like, are we going to do it tomorrow? No, tomorrow in the morning. No, no, it's too busy already. Okay, we do it tonight. Then there was the party. Then there was music. And then I went back to Mexico. And from the moment I hit the ground in Mexico, it was nonstop. Right? And Piotr keeps on asking me too, but when are you going to shoot this video? Are you going to shoot this video? Why are you going to shoot this video? And by now it almost feels like we're taking the piss. I feel like so guilty about actually not having done that video until now. So now I don't even know what type of setting we should actually do it.
Yeah, hopefully it comes out before Avatar 3, hey?
I hope so too.
All right, mate. Great to see your face and great to chat and catch up. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time, given how busy you are. And it's 11:30 at night in London, where Patrick is right now, and he's preparing for courses, and he's very kindly shared his time with all of us. So thank you, mate. I appreciate it. We'll get this out. Hopefully this at least answers some questions and gives us some information that we can sit on until we see the products come and see some more. Again, amazing, and thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. It was just brilliant to catch up with Patrick and talk through the Sidewinder, moving around the closed circuit and learning about each of the innovations that are going into what is going to be an absolutely amazing upgrade to the Sidewinder. I can't wait to see what comes, and I can't wait to start diving it myself. Thanks so much to xDeep for sponsoring this show. It means everything to the show. And thanks also to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount for their support that again means so much to this show. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.